Starlog, 3:36 p.m, July 29th, 2022. I continue to try and educate these earthlings as to the right way to watch movies and TV shows. Is it going into their thick brains? Probably not, but I will continue to at least try until I finally give up and move on to another planet. Bones, another cuppa in here, please, mate. Transmission end. Hi guys, it's time for me to rank the Star Trek films. Over the past few weeks, I have been slowly going through all of these and I'm ready to share my opinions. I have, in the past, occasionally watched a Star Trek film before and quite enjoyed it, but this was my first time going through all of them chronologically, and I thought to myself, this might be my time to finally properly get into Star Trek. I thought I might even go on and watch some of the TV shows after I was done with the movies, but I can tell you now that I will absolutely not be doing that. By the time I got to the end of these 13 films, I was very much ready to end my voyage on the Enterprise. I am not destined to become a big Star Trek fan. Some of these I had fun with, but a lot of the others I was really bored. You're probably wondering why I'm even bothering to do the video. Well, believe me, after I spent the time going through all 13 films, I knew I was going to get at least one video out of it for my channel. But just bear in mind, I'm not a massive fan of these, so there's no point beating me up in the comments about where I've placed this film and that film. This is literally a ranking done by a very casual cinema goer who is not really a natural Star Trek person. Right, let's get into it then and find out what I consider to be the absolute worst film in this franchise. So, I always knew that at some point the crew would change in these movies, but I didn't think they would do it like this, with this weird hybrid sort of film. I mean, narratively, this is an absolute mess. Bringing Kirk back just to have him disappear for like 100 years, and that's his new legacy as far as the rest of the world is concerned. He's just some bloke who vanished in space. I mean, that just spoils the end of number 6 for me. I know he comes back later in this film, but when he does, it's in this really horribly boring dream sequence. I mean, it goes on forever. It's awful. Just after that, we get this really long situation that plays out in the desert between Patrick Stewart and Malcolm McDowell's villain. As villain confrontations go, this is just one of the most awful slogs I've ever had to sit through in my entire life. It's really, really bad. The first half of this film's all right, but when we get to the second half with all these extended scenes that are just really boring, the film is all downhill from that point onwards. Also, this film seems to expect you to have done your homework a little bit and watched a lot of the Star Trek Generations TV show, because I constantly felt like I was behind the 8 ball in this in terms of understanding the characters' relationships to each other and what they're all about. So I suspect this is really just a film for diehards. It's not very good at all as far as I'm concerned. This one's been a bit unlucky today because I watched it years ago and actually really enjoyed it. The trouble is, it's the sort of film where once you know the answer to the main mystery, it's then hard to rewatch the story because you already know what's causing this whole thing in this film. That was my experience this time around anyway. It's not the most cinematic of Star Trek films. Originally, I believe it was devised as a way to reboot the TV series, but then they sort of changed course at the last minute and decided to do a series of movies, and they adapted this script to be a movie, but it's certainly something which would have been better off in one of the TV shows. It does have a couple of creepy moments that I remember. So when the Enterprise is going through like a wormhole thing, I thought that was quite good. And also there's a moment where the main villain sends this like stick of lightning that just starts going around the main bridge of the ship, and I thought that was quite a tense moment. There's this horrible scene near the beginning though. It's really long and dragged out. So there's a moment where Kirk and Scotty, is that his name? The Scottish engineer guy? They get in this like thing to take them to the Enterprise. It's hard to describe what this thing is. It's like a cable car in space, but without any cables on it. So they start floating towards the Enterprise, and while they're doing this, they look out the window at the ship, gazing at it longingly because they haven't seen it in a while, and there's all this cheesy music playing. And then this scene just keeps going and keeps going, like forever, seemingly. I swear to God, I'm not lying. When this scene starts, you can go and boil the kettle, make yourself a coffee, and I swear to you, when you come back, Kirk and Scotty will still be gazing up at that ship because this thing they're on just takes forever to get to the Enterprise. I've not timed it. It must be a few minutes at least. It's an absolutely ridiculously overindulgent scene. If you know your James Bond films, let me tell you that this for me is like the Die Another Day of the Star Trek franchise. So firstly, it came out in 2002, just like Die Another Day. Secondly, it was the fourth film in the lead actor's run, in this case, Patrick Stewart. Thirdly, the film is pretty bad to the point that it led to a complete reboot of the franchise, just like Die Another Day. So lots of similarities there. I think the biggest sin this film commits is having the villain be related to Picard. I've just seen this so many times in various films and franchises now that I just get sick of it, in all honesty. The film is at least more entertaining than Star Trek the motion picture. You know, there are lots of action sequences throughout, but for the most part, honestly, when I was watching this, I was just looking at my watch, wondering if there would be time to watch a better film after this before bedtime. I've got to say that by the time I got to this one, the 12th, I was running on empty and all the films were starting to blur into each other, sort of. In fact, after I was done with this one, I had to break for like 3 weeks before I watched Star Trek Beyond, because I just felt done after this one, and I really had to force myself in the end to rent Beyond just to finish things off. So I think there's a new version of Khan in this one, but it's just not very welcome at all. And I can't remember that much about the film or the plot already, and it's only been like barely over a month since I saw it. It's big and it's bombastic, but it's not particularly gripping. And the only reason why I've got this one just slightly ahead of Nemesis is that it's a bit more colourful and modern. This one makes me sad. So I actually saw this one at the cinema way back when. It was one of those really random family days out where you decide to go to the cinema and just watch whatever the hell is on there when you get down there. I think some friends came along as well and their families. So I think we ended up splitting into 2 screenings in the end. I think some of us, mostly the guys, went into the Star Trek screening, and a lot of the mums and the really young kids went into this animated film, I think. I can remember, though, really enjoying the film that day. And when I came out of the cinema, I thought to myself, yeah, this was pretty damn good. I wouldn't mind watching more of these. I didn't actually go on to do that. So this rewatch, 25 years on or so, was quite interesting. And I still enjoyed all the stuff between Patrick Stewart and the Borg. There's some good drama between the crew going on. But one thing that happens in this that I'd completely forgotten, which definitely brings the film down, is this whole subplot involving a drunken pilot. I mean, we see a lot of this guy and he really grates. It's nothing to do with the actor. I've seen this same actor in quite a few films, including The Thing. He's pretty good at what he does, but this character is he just gets on my nerves, honestly. I wanted to spend less time with him and more time watching the main action on the ship. So yeah, I was thinking that this one might come quite high today, but after the rewatch, it was like, no, I can only really put it like mid to the lower half, if you see what I mean. So this is the first film in the new reboot series. I at least enjoyed this one a little bit more than the one that comes straight after it. I didn't need all the stuff to do with Kansas at the start of the movie, though, and I definitely didn't need Leonard Nimoy to come back. I mean, again, this just tarnishes the legacy of an old character for me. At the end of part 6, when all the characters just go off into the sunset effectively, that's how I envisage the ending for all those original crew members. Bringing back Kirk in part 7 just to have him vanish, and bringing back Leonard Nimoy here just to have him live out his days in a cave or something. It's like, no, just leave those characters alone. It was fine how it ended at the end of number 6. There is one really great sequence in this that I liked, that I do remember, and I did want to mention, which is, there's like a giant antenna dish in the sky or something, and 3 of the characters have to fly down to it, and there's like a battle with some villains, and maybe a couple of them fall off. I thought that was quite exciting. For the most part, though, I did struggle a little bit to get used to these new versions of these characters. I'm not sure that's what I would have gone with. I just would have had a brand new crew, brand new characters. I mean, would anybody want a Star Wars film with Leia, Hans, and Luke recast and all those stories done over again? I'm not sure they would. So, not the direction I would have gone with, but it's not a terrible film. Just one that didn't really leave that much impression with me. This is probably the least passionate I've ever been about any rankings I've ever done on this channel, to be honest. So we've arrived at the final one of the Patrick Stewart era. For me, this is the best of that 4-film run. I liked a lot of the production design in this. A lot of the visuals are very kind of ancient Greece, strange reason to like a film, but there's just a look to this film that I kind of liked. And I think by this point, the 3rd film in this run, I was starting to get to know the characters. I was enjoying the interactions between the crew members a lot more so than I was in Generations and First Contact. And the storyline in this one is one of the better stories. That the second half of the film has got a few twists that actually make sense and are very, very enjoyable when they come along. So for me, definitely the highlight, I guess, of the Patrick Stewart era. So this is our last one today out of all the modern ones, both Patrick Stewart era and Chris Pine era. With me and Star Trek, I only really like the old school ones. You know, those are films which I've seen every now and again since I was a kid. I've got quite a bit of affection for them. The later ones, not so much. That said, this most recent one they did, Star Trek Beyond, is actually a pretty damn good film. I think it definitely helped that I took a break after Star Trek Into Darkness, because I felt like watching this felt fresh again to me. That wouldn't have been the case if I'd have just carried on and watched it straight after the previous one. I like the characters a lot more in this one than I did the first two. Again, I think it's just a case of needing 2 or 3 films to get to know them. That's part of the reason why I was quite favourable today towards Star Trek Insurrection. There's also a good story with this. I like how they crash land on this weird planet and they've got to get off. There's a really good sequence I remember where they're running around the crashed Enterprise and then they've got to slide down the outside of it. That was pretty cool. And the final fight in this, in that domed glass, that domed city, was pretty impressive. Some good stuff with gravity and flying around and a good little final bit. I've got no major complaints about this film. It was good. A good solid bit of entertaining sci-fi, albeit still not quite as good as the older Star Treks. This one was always on TV when I was growing up. You could almost play it as a double bill with Masters of the Universe, another 80s film about a bunch of characters landing on Earth and they're totally out of their element. I mean, even crossing the road looks like an ordeal for Kirk and his crew in this film. It's a little bit scant on the action, this one. But I like the plot involving the whales. I think that's quite clever. And there's this fantastic little bit with Chekhov, when he's asking where the nuclear weapons are, and this policeman's just looking at him really blankly. And I think the woman in this, Catherine Hicks, I think is her name, who plays Kirk's love interest, I think she's really good, got lots of charisma. And given the fact that she goes back to the future at the end of this, I think it's a shame that she didn't go on to be in the 5th and the 6th film. This is one of the very few of the older ones that I didn't see growing up for whatever reason. And when I finally got on it, I was expecting a train wreck because this film does not have a very good reputation at all. But I just thought it was a good, fun Star Trek adventure. All that stuff to do with God at the end, you know, what does God want with a starship? I thought it was absolutely hilarious in a good way. I liked the story for this. I liked the mystery of not knowing what was going to be at the end of this journey they were being dragged on. So it sort of plays out a little bit like the first film, but there's just more action, more going on. I liked all the stuff to do with the camping trip at the start. I thought that stuff was really funny. There's a good bit as well with where they're using gravity boots in a shaft or something, from what I can recall. I've got very, very few complaints about this particular Star Trek film. At the time I watched this one, I was fully into them, fully invested, and still having fun. So possibly an upset here, because I know for most people this is the absolute best of the Star Trek films. And I can't really explain why it's not my number one, because these last few at the top of my list. They're all excellent films. I've separated them mostly on feel, but I've got no complaints about Star Trek 2. It is a classic. I saw it many times growing up. There are a few things in this film that are actually quite creepy and veer towards horror. You know, the characters going to like a little space docking station and like there's loads of dead people inside, and there's that moment with the eel going into the ear that really creeped me out as a kid. Some great visuals in the film, great villain obviously with Khan, and it's just a fantastic film. This was such an improvement over Star Trek the motion picture. I could have put this number one, could have done. It was very, very close, like I said, between these top three, but this one didn't quite make it. One thing I like about this one is the fact that the characters get to go to this space station and you get to see a bit of the culture there, and they hang out in a bar and you see all these weird people. I would have liked to have spent more time in this place actually, had the story allowed it, but the subsequent escape on the Enterprise is well handled. I think the villains are good in this. Christopher Lloyd as a Klingon is absolutely fine. I think these Klingon villains are at least the equals of Khan and his ruffians from the previous film. I think the resurrection of Spock is done quite well. You know, it's set up from the previous film, this whole idea that the Genesis project could do that. They don't just pull an excuse out of their arse to bring Spock back. So yeah, for me, this is a really solid Star Trek film and only just misses out on top spot. Another thing I liked about this was the costume design as well, something that stuck out for me, and it's something that I've remembered about it. But anyway, let's find out what is my favourite Star Trek film of all. Yep, so for me, Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, is the best of these. I think it's got an awesome plot. The idea of Kirk and his buddies being framed, and Kirk and Bones get sent to this icy planet with this underground prison, and they've got to escape from there, and then they come across this shapeshifter or something that they've got to defeat. That whole section of the film is absolutely brilliant, and there's a great villain in this as well. I forget the actor's name. I've seen him in loads of films in days gone by, but he's got a real presence in this, and his death, where he sort of quotes Hamlet or something just before he gets blown up, I thought that was really good. And the ending you get for all the original crew in this, I think, was the way to go. You know, give them a happy ending, send them off into the sunset. Don't do what they did with Generations. And, well, we've talked about that stuff anyway already, haven't we? So, yeah, for me, this is number one. But do let me know what you think. Put your rankings of the Star Trek films in the comments for me to take a little peek at. Doubtless, other people have these completely different from how I've got them. But I'll say one last time, this is totally not my franchise. You know, I did my best with it. I sat through all the films, and these are my opinions, you know, whether you agree with them or disagree. Right, that's it for today. Thank you for sticking with me for this long, if that's indeed what you have done, and I will return for another video very soon. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.